Welcome to AI've Got Questions, the podcast for marketers trying to keep up with AI without getting overwhelmed. I'm Stacey Epstein, a longtime CMO who's spent enough time in the trenches to know it's not that people aren't using AI, it's that everyone's busy. The landscape is changing fast, and it's hard to know what's actually worth your time. Each week, we cut through the noise to uncover the tools, the tech, and the real-world use cases that matter, because the future's moving fast, and we've all got questions. I'm really excited. I recently introduced to Adam Corey from Naro and very excited to have you on the show today. In fact, recommended by a CMO friend of mine who is just about to implement Naro into her company. So yay, another new customer.
Another new customer. I love it.
Tell us a bit about you. Let us get to know you and then we'll talk about your company.
Sure. Yeah. So my background really last 20-ish years in the SaaS world. Everything's running the seller. So I started my career as a solutions engineer, so kind of supporting from that side, and worked my way to the marketing side and was a CMO for a customer data platform called Telium here in San Diego. And that journey, I think even from the early days, led to kind of my obsession with how do you stay in touch with and enable salespeople. And that's what led to the idea that we're going to talk about today with Naro.
Awesome. Well, as a former CMO myself, it's so important to really understand your target market, your buyer persona, and you have lived it, which it seems like you already got that one down. So you got a good start here.
Well, and I joke that, a lot of my gray hair and anxiety comes from that period of my life where it's like you're doing a lot of research, you're understanding a lot, but you know that there's so much that you're missing or that you're not understanding, or that and that's really where, what kept me up at night, that I'm like, there's something here that we can do. And fortunately, in the era of AI, we're getting to where it's possible to do that.
Yeah. Did you pick one of your biggest or the single biggest area of pain that you had a CMO and said, I feel like we can solve this?
Yes and no. So it's a classic kind of startup story where we started off to solve the discoverability and usability challenge on the sales side. And so by that I mean marketing produces a ton of great stuff, blood, sweat, and tears to get case studies approved, and working for weeks and months to get, decks enabled and brought in the organization, only to find yourself sitting there and seeing, last year's slides now mixed with this year's slides, or somebody not
Right.
using a case study that you're like, do you
Yep.
know what we had to go through with legal to get this approved? And
Amen.
so we started off to solve the challenge of using AI to sit in the conversation flow of sellers, whether that's email or conversations like this, and suggest and predict based on what they're talking about the content that you need, the materials, the proof points, etc. And that was a way to say, let's lower the burden on the sales side of the house to say, don't remember everything that marketing's done, because marketing, the better a marketing organization gets at content marketing and thought leadership and all this stuff, the harder it is for a person to remember all this. So let's focus on just in time enablement. And so that's what we came to market with. And what was really interesting, and what led to, I think, the more exciting start of the chapter of Naro was, we built a recommendation platform that looks at conversations, identifies the best thing to present in that moment. One of my co-founders was chief algorithm officer at Stitch Fix. So he built this at scale at Stitch Fix. Very different context, but some interesting similarities that we can talk about later. But what we found through this recommendation platform is, it's all well and good when I have that great case study that is hitting the mark with what's coming up right now. But all the other times that I don't have something that's hitting the mark, or something that's slightly different, that data that we were actually sitting on, that we weren't doing anything with in the early days, became a really interesting source of data to mine, to say, well, what if we could actually leverage that data to tell marketing or tell enablement leaders or tell sales leaders, here's what's going on at scale in all of these conversations. And not only that, here's how it compares to everything that you've written, all of your webinars, your case studies, et cetera. And we evaluate them side by side to say, where does this work and where doesn't this work? And actually point out what you can do. And so that's really where that functionality came to market about 6 months ago. And that's been really exciting to say, okay, we're just starting to scratch the surface of what you can leverage with that.
Super fascinating. So It's funny when you said recommendation platform, I immediately went to what I know of as recommendation engine, but I guess it's platform too, where I'm shopping for something and the company's smart enough to say, well, if she's shopping for a striped sweater, she might want some jeans to go with that. Let's recommend. But I think if I understand this correctly, what you're saying is I'm a salesperson on a phone with a prospect and they're telling me some of the things that they're interested or the problems they're having or, typical discovery questions. And then on the fly, I can have a piece of content that matches what they're asking for. Is that? Because that's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, think about it this way. And this is what's interesting about the Stitch Fix kind of comparison to some of this. When you think about personal styling and why Stitch Fix was so successful, was you're taking in all of these inputs. A stylist is taking in all of these inputs about, what I care about, my preferences, what this is for, all sorts of stuff, my current state of my wardrobe. And without Stitch Fix, a stylist would be left with, a world of options and they would make all these individual decisions. But when you think about it as an AI human in the loop problem, you can say, how can I make sure that we are improving the outcomes of the decisions that this stylist makes so I can make them faster and better? Translating that over to B2B and salespeople, it's kind of the same thing. I am there doing discovery calls. I'm having conversations. All of these inputs are coming up that are telling me what someone cares about and how that maps to what we do as a business and how I can solve that problem for them. And in that, I've got a world of choices that I could make around how do I respond? What do I show? How do I handle this objection, et cetera? And so what Naro does is saying every conversation, we're going to break that down into the topics that came up. What did Stacey care about? What's her pain point? What are the questions that she's asking right now? What are the objections that she's throwing up to say like, hey, this is going to be something that we're going to have to think through. And Naro from the recommendation side will say, well, I've got content here that's perfectly suited to help her. Great. I'm going to suggest that to the seller. I'm going to use that in my dialogue with you and my follow-up with you. But then in all of those other areas where you raised something that wasn't really covered well, or you brought up how you're using maybe a competitive solution that we hadn't heard before, and all of these little outliers start to be peppered into the conversation, that we're also capturing that to say, there's something I can do with this. And when more of those come up, I should build content on that. I should actually do something so that the next time that comes up with the seller, or even in that moment, because this is an active deal, I can be alerted to that on the marketing side in the moment to say, this is good. We should think about responding to this and writing a blog post or doing something with that.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so let me rephrase it and make sure I understand it properly. Because to me, it sounds like you're solving two really big challenges. And one is a sales rep being talented enough to really listen, take really good notes, really understand the prospect, and then find the right piece of content that's already been created that speaks to that, which let's face it, that's a pretty rare sales rep and they exist, but those are like your killer sales reps. So you're kind of making all sales reps as good as your killer sales rep in terms of listening, understanding, and responding. And then the second thing that you're doing is that you are alerting marketing and let's face it, probably product, competitive, right? Like a lot of teams want to know, hey, what is it that prospects are asking for that we haven't thought of, we haven't covered, is new. You're educating the entire company on the latest and greatest need in our target market, which we also know is incredibly hard to do.
It's hard. I mean, you think about, working with sales, and again, you want to work together. You're coming at it from two different perspectives, and you have two different time horizons that you're shooting for in a way where sales is targeting, this month, this quarter. And yes, they're planning ahead too, but really they're being judged on what they can bring in right now. And so as a result, they're demanding of the rest of the organization, marketing in particular, for the things that they need to affect change today. And it's really biased. It's what can get me that big deal right now, or I just got out of this conversation and this slide was fire, so I'm going to only use this slide. This is great. Forget everything else. It's natural because you're in the moment. Whereas marketing has to, and the organization as a whole, hopefully led by marketing in a lot of ways, has to think about the wider market all of the kind of challenges that are coming up, and not just that one deal that's going to get through. It's one and the next 10 or 100. And that's where I think what excites me about AI is, how else can I do that as a marketer? When I was doing this, it was meeting with sales, surveying sales, and trying to listen in ad hoc to things that I thought would give me insights. Those are really hard. And you are, looking for needles and haystacks there. And you're also often asking sales to take time. And again, that's biased. They don't have the time. The best sellers definitely don't have the time. So maybe you're getting advice and insights from people that have more free time, which maybe that's not great. And so being able to give marketing the ability to have true comprehensive knowledge and understanding, that is, I think, where we're headed with this era of AI. And I think marketing is really well positioned to take more of a strategic leadership role into the revenue organization.
I absolutely agree with the need for marketing to have that data. I started my career as a sales rep, and I was constantly frustrated with the marketing team for like not understanding that the sales deck was not what I wanted. And I was creating my own sales decks because I was understanding the prospect. And honestly, it's why I got into marketing. And I've taken that for the subsequent 30 years. The people that know what we should be doing in marketing are the salespeople. But I would argue that it's not that common for marketing to spend a lot of time pulling that info from sales. A lot of marketers work in silos. They might be researching the market, and maybe the really good ones are having conversations with customers, but that doesn't happen enough. And I think that kind of sucking up your ego as a marketer and saying it's okay to believe that sales really knows what's going on, and I need to go ask them for that. And so I think not only are you making it easier, but you're serving it up to the ones that aren't doing that as their basic practice today.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, marketing, as we all know, as 13, 1,500 different functional responsibilities. And, you are just trying to keep up. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And it is not possible to go and have your team, hey, listen to these 40 sales calls. And then let's talk about them. Without AI, you can't do that. I can't give up a person for a
No, you
week
can't.
or a day to say, like, hey, analyze this stuff. Because if I knew that that was going to help us deliver a killer deck, maybe I would take that and say, okay, but am I going to get that? Is that a really reasonable way to do it? Probably not. And what excites me, one, about what we're doing and just AI in general, is we spent, I think, as a people, the last year or so, kind of playing with AI in a way that saves me 20 minutes or saves me an hour or can make my dog look like a human. But now which is very cool. But now we're thinking about what can AI do that is impossible for a human to do. And the sales deck thing is such a good example. And it's like the stress of bringing a new sales deck to market is like all these stakeholders, et cetera. One of the things that we've been doing with customers is taking the sales pitch conversations, the deck conversations, and analyzing them together to say, here are the last 100 times that this deck was presented. Let's pull together a primary flow of what are all the ways that salespeople are currently going through this story. And let's honor the way that they're currently going through this story. And let's start from there, as opposed to what often happens is we have this version of the deck and we're going to just refresh this version of the deck, or we're going to give sales a giant choose your own adventure and we're going to have somebody else kind of lead certification on the deck. But it's not really rooted in comprehensive analysis of what is actually going on. We do this thing where we call it kind of like the pre-existing environment analysis on these conversations to say, oh, before you pitch, what are the pain points that we heard from the prospect before the pitch started? What were the questions that were starting to come up? Some of this is captured in discovery, but some of it is coming up kind of just in the very early day moments before that pitch gets underway. That is where you want to understand, like, where is this buyer right now? Because that's where I want to, everyone can agree on that. Like, sales wants to meet them where they are. Marketing wants to meet them where they are. And I think this is the type of stuff that we can all agree on, that we can find common ground between sales and marketing and not have to, fight for, attention or anything else, to say, what are we trying to do? We're trying to meet them where they are, and we're trying to bring them to where they could be with us. And that, I think, is, you have to have data to do that. Otherwise, you're just arguing over the market perspective versus the most recent deal perspective.
Yeah. I do think the deck is such a good example because it does represent that point in time for in the sales cycle where you're like, okay, I've listened to you, hopefully. I'm now going to tell you how my company meets your specific need and how I, with my solution, can deliver you value. And I would argue that
Yeah,
the best sales reps are the ones that manipulate the deck the most,
absolutely.
right? And so
Absolutely.
if you're just churning out a 45 slide deck and you're saying, "Hey guys, this is what you should use." And if a rep just takes it verbatim and presents it, it's probably not going to be effective. And I know coaching teams that were building decks, I always said, you got to have a best friend that's a customer, and you got to have a best friend that's a really successful sales rep. And we do not launch this deck until they have both seen it and given input. And that's a lot to ask.
I love that. I'm stealing that. That's great.
And now you're telling me I have it at my fingertips across a lot of different prospects and a lot of different salespeople, and I can leverage that to help drive what I'm doing in marketing and what my sales reps are doing in sales.
Yeah, I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and that's really exciting, which is to
Yeah.
say you have your best friend who's a customer, you have your best friend who's a sales leader or great seller. When you come to them with something to say, like, hey, I looked at all of this. This is what I'm seeing. This is how I'm seeing it. How do you see this? You're able to comment on this thing as opposed to both starting from your own corners or a blank slate that you're trying to create something on, to say, no, here's what happened last quarter. Here's all the stuff that we heard last quarter. Truly, everything we heard last quarter. This is what I think we could do here. What do you think we could do here? That's just a much more fun place to be. And I think that's where, again, kind of both and of like, I would love to have that conversation with my best friend sales leader to say, like, we could actually solve this because you're an expert on actually communicating with the customer and bringing that conversation back and forth. You can bring that perspective into what I'm doing, which is to kind of connect it to the wider journey. Let's collaborate on that, but let's actually be real about the common data that we need to start from.
Yeah. Okay. So cool. I'm so glad I was introduced to you, and I feel like we're
I
kindred spirits. We're going to be friends after this.
love it.
One last question. As a
Yeah.
as a fellow entrepreneur, I had my own company a few years back, and I know the journey, the highs, the lows. What made you make that leap? And I know you're early, but like, how's it going? How's it feeling? It seems pretty exciting for you. Just a lot of listeners are CMOs and maybe have some ideas, so I'd love to just hear the entrepreneurial side of this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a couple of things. One, I really wanted the opportunity to be out on the high wire in a way, to really, take what I have learned and actually try to make something to solve some of the problems that I was facing in a way that I didn't see it happening. And I wanted to see if I could do it. And it really was a, can I do this? And, I think there are days where I'm like, oh my gosh, what, this is too big of a problem, or this is too hard or something. And then there are afternoons where I'm like, holy cow, this is really driving value and this is awesome. And then you rinse and repeat, you do it over and over again. And I'm fortunate enough to not be a 20 something, no offense to the 20 something year olds, but there are a lot of great founders during their 20s. I could not be that because I've learned along the way what type of a leader and person I am. And one of the things that I knew very clearly, Stacey, kind of to your point, is I'm better when I have my best friend, other perspective people. And so I was fortunate enough to meet two other now co-founders that had different perspectives, that we could look at this problem from different angles to be able to say, here's what I'm seeing. How could we do this? And I think that's the only way that this is as successful and delivering value the way that it is, because it's not something that is fully in my head. It's like problem and shape coming from here, but how we can tackle it is taken so much further when you have people that are experts in their areas together. And so it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun.
Well, I love it. I think it's going to add great value. Again, the company is Naro, spelled Naro.
So check us out, narohq.com, to do a little plug there. But
Of course, well, we will definitely plug and make sure people know how to get in touch with you. I have a feeling a lot of people will. So thank you again. Such a pleasure to have you. And we'll check back in, 6 months, a year, and see how it's all going.
I love it. And Stacey, congrats on the pod. Really excited.
Thanks.
It's great stuff.
Awesome. Appreciate it. All right.
Take care.
Have a great day. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.